Hi, everyone. Welcome to part 4 of the U.S. chapter of Women's Declaration International Series, Living the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. Tonight, we will focus on Article 4 on women's rights to freedom of opinion and freedom of expression. First, we'll hear from Christina Ellingsen, who comes to us all the way from Norway, where it's 1 a.m. her time. Christina is the Norway country contact for WDI, and she will tell us about the risks of criminal charges that she is currently facing in her country due to her feminist opinions and expressions. Then we'll have Q&A for Christina, and after that, Christina is welcome to stay as long as she likes, or she can leave us to go get some rest. Next, we'll hear from Lierre Keith. Lierre is a longtime feminist and the chair of the board of the Women's Liberation Front, or WOLF. She will talk about the importance of free speech in a democratic society. Finally, I'll share some remarks about the climate of fear that our opponents are trying to create, highlighting the example of a WOLF event at the Seattle Public Library in February 2020. We'll close with some more Q&A and discussion, and we'll end right at 8 p.m. Eastern. So with that, Christina, please join us and tell us a little bit about the ordeal that you are facing in Norway, maybe starting with the words that you said that got you in trouble. Welcome, Christina. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Kara. And thank you, everybody, for having me on. Yes, well, the words, there were quite a lot of words. The law, Norway has a hate speech law, which introduced gender identity January 2021. And the thing I've been reported to the police for, and which what I'm currently under investigation for, is every single interaction since the law came into effect that I've had with an advisor hired by the LGBTQ organization Föreningen Fri, or it's called Free. It's our sort of Stonewall UK equivalent, or I'm not sure what the US equivalent would be. So I've been campaigning for women's sex-based rights since about 2020. Actually, I attended the hearing for this law that is being enacted against me in 2020. And I went there and I told them that if they introduce gender identity into the law, it will be used to harass women. It's unavoidable, and we've seen it happen everywhere where this kind of language is introduced into hate speech laws or anything that resembles hate speech laws. And that's exactly what happened. 2 years later, I'm now being under investigation under the suspicion of having committed a hate crime for essentially saying, or I've just been repeating myself over and over and over again. Women and girls are female and have sex-based rights, and it's not possible to change sex, and men can't be women, girls, mothers, or lesbian. So yeah, that's currently what's happening here.
Okay, how did you learn that you were being investigated? Did the police approach you? Did you receive something in an email or something?
I was contacted by the police on May 16th, and then informed that I was under investigation, under suspicion of having conducted hate crimes. And then they called me to come in to be questioned about the potential crimes that I had committed. The report was given to the police in January. And they just started investigating it now in May. I've been to 2 police interviews, a total of 9 hours, because the sheer amount of tweets that have been reported requires well, it takes time to go through. It's such a massive waste of resources, and it's just incredible. They told me that it has a status as a priority case for them. So they are, they are prioritizing this case, which I'd also just find absolutely incredible. Well, I'm expecting to hear if they will press charges or not within the next couple of weeks, maybe a couple of days.
Okay, so I was wondering if they had pointed to any specific communications that you had uttered, which they considered hate speech, but it sounds like they just have many tweets and Facebook posts that they're investigating you about.
Yes, well, the report included the report that was given to the police by the man that has reported me includes every single interaction we've had since the law came into effect. It also included one hearing that I gave to the government regarding conversion therapy, a ban on conversion therapy. So they included a hearing, and it also included a TV debate that I had with where the man who has reported me was also present. And at the time, he had already reported me to the police, which is it's just such a massive dishonesty. He stood there and said, you're free. Well, I had to inform the man on TV that he is a man, so he can't be a mother. And that's not only true because it's physically impossible to change sex, but it's also true in the Norwegian legal sense, because when you change your legal gender in Norway, it is specifically limited by your parental status. So your parental status will remain the same. So I told him, I had to tell him on TV, you're a man, you can't be a mother. And also it is a defined form of discrimination against women to force women into understanding, a man as a woman, because motherhood is a protected status. Yeah. But not only had he already, well, he lied and said, well, I'm still a woman and you're free to think whatever you want about that, which was obviously a lie because he had already reported me to the police for having made several of the same statements to him.
I want to clarify, this man reported you. First of all, how do you know that he's a man?
Yeah, well, one of the ways I really know he's a man is because if he was a woman like he says he is, he couldn't have pressed charges against me. There would have been no laws to protect, because women aren't protected. Biological sex isn't protected in this paragraph. So he's in a bit of a paradoxical situation, I think, because if he is what I say he is, which is a man who claims to be a woman, then he is protected by the paragraph. But then what I'm saying is true. So is that the purpose of the law, to arrest women who are saying the truth? But if he is what he says he is, a woman, well, okay, he's a woman then, but then he wouldn't have any protection in that paragraph. So that's kind of funny, or paradoxical.
Yeah, but it is, as so much of this is so paradoxical.
Yeah, but also it's also incredibly ironic. Like after I went on TV and said, "You're a man, you can't be a woman," Amnesty International Norway went out and said that I had harassed him on TV, which is just also incredible because Amnesty is supposed to be a protector of human rights. And to claim that a man...
I need to interrupt you just because there's a lot going on here. And I just want to pull out some of these really interesting points that you're making. If I heard you right, you're saying that he reported you for hate speech, and then he voluntarily showed up on a television show with you, which strongly suspects that he is in fact not afraid of you. And
of course.
Yeah, and that he does not actually think that anything you said is hate speech. And that's, I think, is that what you mean when you say he's lying?
Well, I'm not going to be reading anybody's minds. I don't know what his motivations are. I don't care, because all I need to know about him is that he is a man, and he is employed by one of the most powerful institutions in the country, and their job is to advise. Their expertise is to advise people on sex and sexuality. As far as I'm concerned, I've been in a dialogue with somebody who claims to be an expert on sex and sexuality, and my dialogue with them has been, well, women are female and have sex-based rights, so how are you, so what are you going to do about that, basically? Yes, he met with me on a TV debate, and when I said, you're a man, you can't be a woman, you can't be a mother, he then said that that was no problem to him. He had no issues with that at all. But not only had he already reported me to the police, but later he would report that very statement. He would report screenshots of that part of the discussion to the police, like several times. Which is just so deeply dishonest. It's just, the dishonesty is just, yeah, it's astonishing. The audacity is just astonishing. But we're celebrating.
It's a really important, Christina, your case is so important. And this is why we all have to stand so firmly for women's rights to freedom of opinion and expression. We've got a few more minutes with you, I think, if you're still willing to stay with us. What else do you want to share about your story? If I recall correctly, something happened in the wake of the shooting, the tragic shooting that happened around Pride in Norway.
Oh yes, yeah. It's also the just consistent trivialization of threats of violence against women. So immediately we had a shooting leading up to Pride. And 2 men were shot and several others were damaged. And immediately I started getting messages saying that I was responsible for this shooting because I had participated in criticizing Pride. And I can go into, maybe I should go into, Pride in Norway is owned by this union, this organization, Free. They changed the political agenda several years ago. So it used to be for like gay rights, but since 2016, it has been about legalizing procuration, legalizing surrogacy, removing our Nordic model for protection of prostitutes, for prostituted women, and also to introduce fetishes and all sexual minorities, whatever the hell that means, into the discrimination protection in Norway. So basically, I've been saying, people should not participate in Pride because it is the most, categorically, the most misogynist corporate event of the year. And that's why people shouldn't join, shouldn't, participate in Pride. Immediately, after the shooting, I started getting messages saying that I was to blame, that it was my responsibility, that my words had led to this man going and shooting these men. And it became so, at first it was just online, but then one day, very shortly after the event, somebody came and wrote on my door, "Suffer and die." So I had to take my daughter and escape, essentially. We just went out of town for a week. And I reported it to the police. Or I notified the police. I asked them, "Can you check this out? This is creepy as hell." And,
I just want to be very clear about this. I just want to be very clear. Someone put a note on your door that said, "Suffer and die."
Yes, they wrote in red ink, just next to my door, "Suffer and die," directly onto the wall. And I reported it to the police. They notified me and said, "This is fine. That's fine. We're just going to close this case." And I appealed. I sent them a new one, where I said, well, let me just show you, what this exchange, how it looks like, from my perspective, and just show, because trans activists are the most aggressive, violent, unhinged of all activism I've ever seen. Like, I know Antifa is pretty bad, but I just feel like this Antifa / trans activist is just unleashing a level of like pure hatred that I didn't even know existed. So I've sent a new one to the police, and I'm hoping that they will investigate it. But it's just so ironic, yeah. It's just such a consistent trivialization of the constant threat of violence that women are living with anyway. And then when it's directly written on the door, like a couple of inches on the other side is where my daughter lives. That's not a prioritized case, to say it like that. Like they are prioritizing going through all my tweets and my hearings and like the TV debate, but they're not investigating whether or not my life is in any danger, which they obviously, which is discrimination. This is what discrimination against women is. It's this constant trivialization of what women experience in order to make life more comfortable for men. And
Christina, whoever...
But we're not, nobody's going to silence anybody here. Like, of course, I'm really looking forward to hear what the outcome will be, because it will be interesting either way. And I just think there's going to be a lot more of these cases. So we should just all, prepare, basically.
I totally agree with you. And Christina, I have a quick question for you, and then there are a couple other questions. My quick question for you is, I'm willing to assume that whoever wrote that on your home doesn't know that you have a daughter, but is it true that the police know that you have a daughter?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course they know I have a daughter.
Of course they do. Okay, so some questions are coming in for you. One is, what can we do to support you? Another is, are there any activist groups or individuals in Norway that support you?
Well, when it comes to the Norwegian women's movement, it's gone. They're not gone, but the same thing has happened here that I think has happened everywhere. Like, they've been taken hostage by language, so they're sort of allowed to do like female-ish type of activism and politics, but they have to forfeit their language. They have to refer to people with uteruses, and they have to include men. So I just feel like they can't really be considered women's organizations if they can't define what women are. So from the Norwegian women organizations, no. But from women all over the world, yes. Like, absolutely. And I am, and from the women who wants to stand in this fight, we find each other, and we're making, we have a movement. And I just I just feel so lucky, because I feel like this topic is just bringing out the most brilliant women ever. Like, they're all so incredibly intelligent and brave. So I'm really happy. I don't need like 50 organizations who don't know what a woman is to support me. I just need 5 women, 50 women who knows what a woman is, and to know that women have the right to reject men's convictions, and they have the freedom of speech. So yeah, I'm getting a lot of support from the right people.
Good. That's what we're here for. One last question, and then we'll let you go. The question: do you have a lawyer?
I do have a lawyer. I also have. We've started WDI Norway's legal fund to help women in our situation, in my situation here in Norway. I'll send you a link, Kara, so you could help me fundraise. Yeah, no, I do have a lawyer, and of course, lawyers are really expensive, but they're also very necessary. And it's very, very exciting to be working on the legal aspects of how this particular law is being applied, and also looking at like other law, the conflicts, the details, how it happened, and what we can do. Like, what are women's rights in Norway really? Like, what can we actually enact and use in order to, because obviously we have the human rights and we have the CEDAW, the Convention of Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, which Norway has ratified and which is supposed to be, which is part of Norwegian law. So yes, I do have a lawyer, and we are ready to take this as far as it needs to be taken.
That's really great. That's great. Christina, I think we're going to move on to Lierre now, and we're going to invite you to stay as long as you would like, but also if you need to go get some rest, it's almost 1:30 in the morning for you.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'll stick around for a little bit, but thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much, Christina, for being here. The law that Christina is referring to is CEDAW, the Convention against Discrimination of all, the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. The United States of America is one of, I think, 3 countries that has not ratified CEDAW. Christina, thank you so much for being with us tonight and for sharing your story. We support you. And so now we'll turn to Lierre, who's going to talk about free speech in general. And I know it's a topic that Lierre is very committed to. So Lierre, thanks for joining us. Please
sure
take
thing. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool. My mother was a librarian, and I remember that hallowed day at age 6 when I finally got my own library card. And I don't mean this as a joke. I'm pretty sure that gravitas was similar to what the Catholic kids felt at their first communion. It was that important in my family. My mother loved books. She believed in the power of stories to guide us and the power of ideas to transform us. For my mother, anyone engaged enough to be hungry, she wanted them fed. We live in such cynical times, but being a librarian was her calling, not just her job. My mother was also a feminist. In 1968, the poet Muriel Rukeyser wrote, "What would happen if one woman told the truth about her life? The world would split open." Propelled by collective pain and inchoate rage, women like my mother found the words, saw the pattern, called it political, created theory, and built a movement to liberate women. And the world did split open. A short history of feminist accomplishments: rape crisis hotlines, battered women's shelters, abortion and birth control on demand, sexual harassment laws, equal funding for girls' sports, a storming of the barricades in the trades and professions, and a flowering of lesbian culture. We are now supposed to sneer at them for knowing that women are women, but it was exactly that knowing that let them change the world. We owe them everything. As for my father, well, my father's people fought off the Nazis to then lose catastrophically to Stalin. My father survived by being a child refugee and then an immigrant. And that's why I was born in the United States and why I have no extended family. I'm surely not the only person on this call whose lineage is a pile of corpses, given the global horrors of the 20th century. And we, that's human race, we were supposed to have learned from those horrors. But if you had told me 20 years ago that one day I would not be able to speak in public unless protected by a phalanx of armed men, I would not have believed you. There's a reason the First Amendment is first. For democracy to work, people need to be able to gather and they need to be able to speak. It really is that simple. So what does the First Amendment actually say? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Madison's original language was that, quote, the full and equal rights of conscience shouldn't be infringed. The House version also included the phrase rights of conscience. So the First Amendment goes in this order: religion, or more broadly conscience, speech, press, assembly, and petition the government for redress. That order is not an accident. You have to have the ability to wrestle all the angels. You have to find that still small voice. You have a right to live an examined life, and indeed, democracy depends on it. Next, you have the right to express your beliefs, because we are a super social species, and we have to attend to our common affairs. We are dependent on each other, and figuring things out using our words is a much better option than violence, which across history has been the fallback plan. A free press comes next, because we need to formulate and exchange ideas on the biggest scale possible to live that examined life and participate in the polis, the political body. Freedom of assembly is where democracy really starts to form. We need to meet with others to make common cause. The Supreme Court wrote, effective advocacy of both public and private points of view, particularly controversial ones, is undeniably enhanced by group association, as this court has more than once recognized by remarking upon the close nexus between the freedom of speech and assembly. So the close nexus between the freedoms of speech and assembly. Each needs the other, and then each becomes the other. And last but not least, we have a right to make demands on our government. That's the end point of this. They are our servants, not the other way around. And if we have to fight for liberty and justice, we can and we will. Now, the Bill of Rights is a document of negative freedoms. It's a list of things that the government won't interfere with. The reason is because it was written by wealthy, property-owning men who only had each other to fear. You don't mess with me, and I won't mess with you, bro. If we widen our lens to include other institutions of power, not just the government, say, for instance, male supremacy, that flow of the First Amendment still fits. A feminist is born when a woman wrestles the angels of self-doubt and self-loathing, and her still small voice says, what happened to me was wrong. And then, what he did to me was wrong. A feminist is born with the power of naming. And I'm going to quote Andrea Dworkin here from her book, Pornography. This is page 17. Men have the power of naming, a great and sublime power. This power of naming enables men to define experience, to articulate boundaries and values, to designate to each thing its realm and qualities, to determine what can and cannot be expressed, to control perception itself. As Mary Daly, who first isolated this power, wrote in Beyond God the Father, it is necessary to grasp the fundamental fact that women have had the power of naming stolen from us. Male supremacy is forced into the language so that every sentence both heralds and affirms it. Thought, experienced primarily as language, is permeated by the linguistic and perceptual values developed expressly to subordinate women. Men have defined the parameters of every subject. All feminist arguments, however radical in intent or consequences, are with or against assertion or premises implicit in the male system, which is made credible or authentic by the power of men to name. And I would highly recommend reading the next 2 pages. What she has to say about naming is absolutely sublime. Anyway, the power of speech is the power to name. And that's what the second wave did. Breaking the silence is a bit of a cliche now, but it's literally what women did. The silence of rape, battering, incest, prostitution, all of it. The truth of those experiences when spoken, finally, by women. The power of naming became the social act of speech. That speech flooded out into feminist journals and newspapers, women's bookstores in every major city, and entire publishing houses devoted to the movement. And of course, speech became assembly, first in small groups for consciousness raising, and then activist groups organized for revolution. Speech became active cries for redress against the horrors of male dominance. And that's why the gender movement, a movement for men's sexual rights, is trying to take all of it away, starting with women's right to speak. It has to start there. Because in order to assume our words, to redefine themselves as us, they need to silence actual women. Did you all hear that the Merriam-Webster online dictionary has changed its definition of female? Yeah, they've added a second definition, quote, having a gender identity that is the opposite of male. What we are losing is our capacity to be citizens in a democracy who have the right to make demands for redress of wrongs. We can't even name ourselves as the wronged now, since women are just a feeling that a man might have. We don't exist as they transfer still more rapists into women's prisons. That's not something done to citizens in a functioning democracy. It's also not something done to human beings in any society that notices our existence. Now, we expected authoritarians from the right. We weren't prepared for it from the left. So a brief catalog of what the left is doing. Women have lost their jobs, they've lost publishers, they've lost custody of their kids, and they've been physically assaulted. The most basic facts of biology are now considered a hate crime, which means the reality of women's lives are back to being unspeakable. Children's bodies, especially their future fertility and sexual function, are being destroyed permanently. The worst part is that no one believes us. Civic institutions that were built as a bulwark against power are crumbling. Journalists are afraid of losing their jobs. And if that doesn't chill you, nothing will. Academia has fallen, though Hogwarts still stands. And people I counted as friends and comrades just want to keep their heads down so they can keep their jobs, hoping that the fever will break because this can't go on. It can, that's the thing, it can get worse. The left has become unrecognizable, and we are in terrible free fall, not because we've become unmoored, but because we've been thrown from the movements we spent our lives building. And for what? For knowing that a woman is an adult human female. I will never stop knowing that. I will never say 5 when the answer is 4. My parents, as people and as small participants in human history, taught me better. I'll end with quotes from 2 of my heroes. The first is Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who says, "There are 3 things that terrify religion: free speech, free thought, and free women." And of course, Andrea Dworkin. Remember, resist, do not comply. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lierre. I have to acknowledge I'm a little bit teary right now. Thank you so much for all of that. Please never stop saying it. I know you won't. You're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat. Thanks so much. Okay, I'm going to talk for just maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And as I do, please, if you have questions for Christina, Lierre, or me, please put them in the Q&A and we'll do our best to track that. I don't know how long Christina will stay with us. It looks like she's still here, or maybe she fell asleep with her Zoom open. Who knows? It's almost 2 in the morning for her. So either way, it's fine. I'm here tonight to talk about the climate of fear that our opponents try to create in order to intimidate us into not speaking up for ourselves. I am also here to say that it will not work. There is nothing, ultimately, that our opponents can do to silence or intimidate us. We will never stop speaking up for the rights, privacy, and safety of women and girls. Women's Liberation Front, WOLF, held an event in Seattle in February of 2020 called "Fighting the New Misogyny, a Feminist Critique of Gender Identity." I was on the WOLF board at the time. The months leading up to the event were, to say the very least, interesting. Our opponents repeatedly tried to get the event canceled because Meghan Murphy was one of the speakers who had become very well known for her statements against gender identity in Canada. It caught the attention of hundreds of misogynists who hate her and the rest of us for speaking truth to power. The other speakers were to be Lierre, me, and Saba Malik. I don't remember exactly why, but I was appointed as the Wolf liaison with the library staff. I established a good rapport with a staff member whose name was Kara shortly after Wolf booked the venue. This was obviously necessary logistically, but it also presented a good opportunity to demonstrate to the library staff that we were the reasonable ones in this situation. We reasoned, let the misogynists show the library what complete idiot babies they are, and let the library see that we are calm and reasonable adults. And predictably, that's exactly what happened. As soon as the event was announced, the calls for cancellation began. The library board had several monthly meetings where the event was discussed. Because the meetings were public, people would show up and throw temper tantrums as to why we are a bunch of evil TERFs and why women deserve to be canceled. Very helpfully, a local Seattle woman named Karen very actively organized a group of women and some men who were on hand to come to our defense. I would watch these meetings live. I will never forget watching Jonah Mix stand up and say, and I'm paraphrasing here, I used to be on the side of the people who are having temper tantrums and asking you to cancel this event. Then I listened to women like those who are scheduled to speak. I listened to what they had to say, and I realized that they were right. Please do not cancel this event. You may not agree with what the speakers have to say, but please just listen. This is why women's rights to freedom of opinion and expression are so important. I truly believe that if our voices can be heard, we will win. Quite unhelpfully, in the midst of all of this, some people on our side started calling for the library board president to resign for even considering canceling the event. In my view, this was unstrategic. We wanted the library on our side, and calling for the board president's resignation would have completely alienated him. I took the time to email him, copying library staff member Kara, and making it very clear that Wolf was emphatically not asking him to resign, and stating that we thought the library's conduct throughout the ordeal was nothing but professional. After all, it was a public library dealing with a matter of public concern. The library board president was not in a position to completely ignore our opponents, nor should he have. All he could do was listen to both sides and make a decision. The event went forward. As a side note, I knew that several women were sharing a house in Seattle and I was invited to stay there. But because my partner was traveling with me, I decided that we would stay in a hotel instead. And I booked a room at a small hotel not far from the library. Coincidentally, Lierre's flight and mine landed at approximately the same time. So we arranged to have a woman pick us all up at the airport and drive us into the city. When we arrived at my hotel, my partner and I opened the door, and there at the registration desk was a very tall man wearing a dress, high heels, earrings, and makeup. I panicked, and I had no idea what to do. We walked up to the desk. I gave my name, and he asked for ID. As I started to hand over my license, I thought, there is no way I can stay here. My name and face are on the event materials. What if he recognizes me? He will have keys to my room. I was terrified. I immediately texted Lierre and explained the situation. She and the woman who had picked all of us up at the airport came back to the hotel, picked us up, and took us to the shared house, where there was an extra room, thankfully, where my partner and I could stay. This is the environment women are living in today. On the day of the event, not satisfied with their failed efforts to get our event canceled, Our opponents called in a bomb threat to the library. The library had to be evacuated and the police brought in to conduct a search. In addition, at some point, it had been decided that although the library has a policy of using a particular entrance for evening events, it would make an exception for this event and use another entrance in the interests of everyone's safety. So by this point, we had done a tremendous amount of work just to make sure the event could go ahead. The library had to evacuate members of the public from it, and the police had to be called, and the library had to have what were probably endless meetings to decide how to make sure the event went off without anyone being killed. I say all of this to hammer home just how relentless our opponents are in their efforts to shut women up. The night of the event arrived. The speakers entered early, and Kara directed us to a small room behind the event auditorium. And then it was time for attendees to enter. There were hundreds of attendees there, which was wonderful. We had done our best to vet attendees through the Eventbrite site, but we were unable to vet everyone, and a few of our opponents were able to secure tickets. The speakers entered the auditorium at the designated time. The head of library security was in close contact with the speakers and organizers. The head of library security began the event warning attendees that disruptions would not be tolerated. Lierre had just begun to thank the library when a few protesters started letting off horns and screaming about Turks. They caused quite a ruckus, and Lierre sat down to wait it out. Women started chanting, "Let women speak." Meanwhile, the speaker sat calmly at the panel table, waiting for the chaos to subside, watching it all go down, having a good laugh, and checking our phones. Eventually, the disruptors were arrested by the police department and removed from the venue. I'm going to play just a few minutes from the video of the event so you can really get a sense as to the environment in the auditorium. The video starts just after Lierre sat down in response to the protesters blowing their horns and yelling loudly, and it includes the initial "Let Women Speak" chant. At just 30 seconds in, you can see a police officer escorting one of the protesters away and the crowd's reaction. After just a minute in, the head of security enters the scene and goes to talk to Lierre. I don't know what he said to her, but I assume he was giving her instructions on how things were going to go from there. At 1 minute, 30 seconds, the head of security addresses attendees and is met with more horns and shouts of "Let women speak." Erupt again, while the speakers sit calmly, waiting to have the opportunity to speak. At 2 minutes and 30 seconds, something else happens off camera. I assume someone else got arrested. And at 2 minutes, 40 seconds, the head of security addresses attendees again. Lierre was then finally able to stand, thank the police department, and give her talk. So now if I can manage it, I'm going to share screen and play 3 minutes of this clip. Have I done it? Do we have the clip? I'm going to assume we have the clip. Okay. This was the environment in Seattle in February 2020.
Okay, everyone. Everyone in the auditorium has received their warning for disruptive behavior. Okay, we're gonna try this again. No more warnings for disruptive behavior. If you disrupt the event, you will be asked to leave. Thank you.
So to my list of thank yous, I'm now going to add the Seattle Police Department.
Who knew that would be necessary? We'll put the link to the entire event in the chat, and I would really encourage everyone to watch it if you haven't already. I wanted to share that because I don't want any woman to underestimate just how much these men, and sadly, quite a few women, hate us. Women are being told that we are not allowed to have opinions about our lives and bodies, and that if we have opinions about our lives and bodies, we are not allowed to express them. Article 4 of the Declaration is all about reclaiming our rights to these opinions and expressions because women refuse to relent. I'm happy to say that the rest of the event was wonderful. All of the talks and the Q&A were fantastic. I hope everyone gets a chance to watch the video, which is admittedly quite long. You can't tell from the video, but throughout the event, hundreds of protesters outside pounded on the glass windows of the library, screaming. It was insane. The speakers left the auditorium first and reconvened in the small room behind the auditorium where we had convened before the event. Once the auditorium had emptied, it became time for the speakers to leave and more chaos ensued. Library security escorted us out of the building and toward the car that was waiting for us. But the car was parked outside of the library security's jurisdiction. A mob of around 300 or so angry protesters were outside the library screaming and holding up signs that read things like "fuck Turks." As soon as they saw Megan, they started coming after us. Thankfully, the Seattle police were on hand. Library security handed us off to the Seattle Police Department, and they got us safely to the car. We piled in quickly, and protesters immediately began banging their fists on the roof and hood of the car while screaming at us. I had never seen such hatred or fury on the faces of misogynists other than when my former abusive partner held me down on the floor with his arm on my neck and glared at me. What women are experiencing today is no different from the misogyny that the suffragists faced when fighting for the right to vote. Men and the institutions that they ran fought as hard as they could to shut women up. But women didn't stop speaking. They were assaulted and jailed, and still they spoke. Women died fighting for the right to vote, and still women spoke and continued to speak we will. Women will continue to have our opinions and to express them. It doesn't matter how much they try to intimidate us. It doesn't matter what names they call us or what they do to us. Women will continue to hold and express opinions, and we will win. Thank you. That's all I had for remarks. We have a couple minutes for discussion. I have not, I confess, been monitoring the Q&A. Lierre's back, great. Bonnie Atwood.
There's a question about the ACLU I thought you might like.
Yes, shocked by the change in the ACLU. Any comment on that? So I worked at the ACLU from 2012 to 2014. I went there to do criminal justice reform policy. I worked specifically on the ACLU's campaign to end mass incarceration and to end the excessive militarization of policing. I conducted the ACLU's investigation into and reporting on the end to excessive police militarization. I do have some thoughts about that. In 2014 is the year that I left the ACLU. I think it was December when I finally left. In 2014, at some point, I don't know exactly when, an attorney called Chase Strangio, who is a woman who claims to be male, went to work at the ACLU and everything changed. Just everything changed. Now, I don't actually credit Chase for all of these changes. I don't credit Chase with much, but I do think that Chase is very heavily funded. And I think that we know for a fact, for example, that last year, there's a foundation called the Arcus Foundation that is absolutely devoted to gender identity and to the abolition of sex. And it gave the ACLU, I want to say it was March of 2021, a $15 million grant, which for a one-time grant to a single nonprofit organization is an extraordinary amount of money. For this foundation that is exclusively devoted to erasing women and abolishing sex, to give the ACLU a one-time grant of $15 million is extraordinary. And I'm sure that's not the only money the ACLU has gotten to pursue this agenda. So my answer to your question, Bonnie, is that the ACLU is paid to do what it's doing. Are there any other questions? I know there's a question about Christina and a link to the fundraiser. Christina said she'd send that to me. That's great. But Christina, if you're still with us, please feel free to share it in chat. Any questions for Lierre about speech or the First Amendment more generally? You know, I really appreciate, Lierre, I appreciate your presentation in part because the question is frequently asked of Americans, do you know what your 5 rights are under the First Amendment? And most Americans don't know. And the most frequently forgotten one is, or not known one, is redress. Most Americans can name speech and religion and press. They're less familiar with assembly, and most Americans are very unfamiliar with redress. Is there anyone who wants to ask Lierre any questions about that? Because I'd love to hear them. Do attendees of this webinar know about the right to redress? I'm not following questions if they're, okay, so Christina's still with us. Christina, what is redress? Lierre, do you want to ask about, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, it just means as citizens, we're actually allowed to approach the government and say, this is the problem, we would like you to fix it. We would like voting rights. We would like fair housing. We would like to be able to travel without being separated, blacks and whites, into separate buses. Like all the things that people have done to make the world better are all about redress. So there's a wrong and you want to fix it. And so you asked your government to do something about it. This goes all the way back to Magna Carta, because which was it wasn't for everybody, obviously. It was the barons who went to the king and said, you know, there's a bunch of things you can't do to us. And we're going to tell you what those things are. And you're going to sign this document. And from this point forward, you won't be allowed to do them. So habeas corpus, for instance, which just means, you know, we have the body. But what that means is the king couldn't just snatch people away and put them in prison and they just disappeared. Like that was declared to be wrong, which of course it is. But our concept of habeas corpus comes directly from that, from what the barons decided, you know, would be their rights under the Magna Carta. So that the redress thing is in there as well, that you're allowed to actually go to the king at that point and say, you know, we have some problems here, and be assured that he wouldn't kill you for it. And that's a big deal. I think we sort of take it for granted now because we sign petitions all the time. But even in England, when they were trying to stop slavery and wanted the government to get more involved in stopping slavery around the world, there was this huge big deal when they went to Parliament and, you know, unrolled this huge, long, you know, thousands of people had signed it across the entire country, and it was their first petition really, and they handed it over in Parliament, and there was some worry that this would be seen as treason. That if you know, told your government they were doing something wrong, that could be considered treason. So they were actually very brave. I mean, we sign petitions every day. We don't even think about it, but people won those rights for us. And we really can't take it, you know, it can be taken away. That's the thing. Like, we really shouldn't just take it for granted. We have to use every single tool, as, you know, as useless as they might feel sometimes. Yeah, I mean, they're all of them are important. And I don't know, we just need a better grounding in where these all came from and what people paid so that we could have them. And then, of course, you know, we need to strategize how to use them more effectively with what we're up against. But that's the basic idea. Kara, you may probably have things to say about this. You're a lawyer, I'm not.
No, I think you said it really great. That is the basic idea. And it was really fundamental to the First Amendment, and I'm very glad it's there. And we're coming up on the hour, and WDI USA tries to keep these webinars very disciplined and stop within the hour. I just want to say, because this part of the series is focused on women's right to freedom of opinion and expression, we can never give this up. I know that those of us watching now, and probably many of us watching the video on YouTube, do not think that the material reality of biological sex is a matter of opinion. Of course it is not. And so that's important. And at the same time, we can have the opinion that women ought to be able to speak our minds. And we ought to be able to say that out loud. And that is the essence of what is being silenced right now. That is the essence of what they are doing to us. That is the essence of everything you saw in that little clip in that video. And you all saw it in that little clip in that video, the way that the speakers, I know that included myself, but the way that the speakers handled that was just to say, you know, we're not paying attention to you. We're gonna go ahead and we're gonna do whatever we wanna do. We're gonna think what we wanna think, and we're gonna say what we want to say. We are going to maintain our freedom of opinion and our freedom of expression. And it doesn't matter what you say to us. It doesn't matter what you call us. It doesn't matter what you do to us. We will never shut up until we have our rights as fully autonomous human beings in this society and throughout the law. And now that it's a minute after the hour, I'm going to end this webinar. I want to thank everyone so much for participating. Please join us for Article 5 next month. It's going to feature all of the board members of WDI USA, and it's going to focus specifically on women's right to freedom of assembly. Please join us. Thank you so much for being here.